Today we will be discussing the fascinating situation surrounding Shy Girl by Mia Ballard, which is, to my knowledge, the first example of a book being pulled from traditional publishing over alleged generative AI use. If you have not heard of this, never fear, I will walk you through the whole entire situation, and then we will of course dive into my thoughts, of which I have plenty. But before we dive into that, just the tiniest bit of housekeeping. Hey, what's up? My name is Meredith. If you enjoy the video, make sure you like or subscribe. Anyway, so what happened? In February of 2025, Mia Ballard self-published Shy Girl, which unfortunately is one of those horror novels where if I were to explain the premise of it to you, I would actually be giving you some pretty big spoilers. But fortunately, the plot of the novel is irrelevant to the conversation we're going to be having. So we can just leave this off with, it's a horror novel and the dog on the cover is relevant to the chain of events. And while the original self-published version was mostly met to positive reviews, there were some early rumblings even back then that there were potential red flags of generative AI use within the writing. However, that was not the early controversy surrounding this book. There is a seemingly unrelated controversy that happened right when the book was first self-published that I'm only bringing up because it does give us a little bit of context into the author, Mia Ballard, that does become relevant when we start to talk about the AI allegations. And it has to do with the aforementioned dog on the cover, because this was not the original cover of Shy Girl. This was. This image of this dog was stolen from a painting by an artist named Wynne Lewis. Mia did apologize for this. She claimed that she compensated the artist and that she didn't intentionally steal it. She found the image off of Pinterest and thought it was fair use. Now, it's unclear to me if this means that she thought that any image on Pinterest is fair game and fair use, or if she more meant that because she didn't actually just take the painting and use it as the cover and she just took the image of the dog head and edited it with some other stuff, that she thought that the final cover that she came up with was fair use. Either way, she was incorrect. But as I've already mentioned, this is kind of irrelevant to the controversy that's happening now, but it does give us some context into the author herself, and a lot of people are bringing this controversy back around in the midst of the new allegations, because if somebody is willing to more overtly steal art in this way, even if they've claimed that that wasn't their intention, it feels like it should have been obvious enough that it's hard to believe it wasn't their intention. And so somebody who's willing to do this, is it likely that they'd be willing to steal art in other ways? Or if you view cropping a piece of a painting and editing other stuff around it as fair use, would you view generative AI use is fair use as well? You get what I'm getting at, right? But despite this controversy with the cover and some early reviews that did allege potential AI use, the book did really well and ended up getting picked up by Hachette, which is one of the big 5 publishers, for a traditional publishing run. And the self-published version was pulled to prepare it for traditional publishing, but not before a YouTuber by the name of Frankie's Shelf could buy the self-published version. In November, Shy Girl was published in the UK, but it wasn't slated for a US release until April, and at this point in time, that release is no longer going forward, and I believe it's been pulled from publishing in the UK. Frankie went on to make a video about Shy Girl called "I'm Pretty Sure This Book is AI Slop," and it's safe to say if you look at the runtime, Frankie had a lot to say about it. Frankie published this video in January, and in the midst of all of this, I have seen some people talking about whether or not Frankie should have made this video. So I'll just tell you where I stand on that right now. I personally don't think Frankie did anything wrong here. Now you can say I'm biased because I'm also a booktube creator and I have made a video of a very similar style at one point. I would admittedly be a pretty big hypocrite if I said I had a problem with Frankie's video, but I just firmly believe that you have a right to share your opinion on a book. And if it is your opinion after reading a book that you think that there was potential generative AI used, then I think that's a valid thing to share. But it's fair to say that creators with big platforms should be responsible with those platforms. But to me, responsibility in this instance looks like having evidence to back up what you're saying beyond just, I don't like the writing, which Frankie did have. Frankie had quite a few points as to why they were saying they thought generative AI was used, which we will go over in a second, but I just kind of want to finish what I'm saying about why I think it's fine that Frankie made this video. Ultimately, Frankie's entire channel is based around their opinion on books. They read this book, and in their opinion, AI was used, and the arguments they were making for that went beyond just, I didn't like the writing, and so I think generative AI must have been used. There were some tangible points being made and some good points being made, which is why this video video ended up being such a big deal and why people ended up walking away from it somewhat convinced. So yeah, I don't think that Frankie did anything wrong making this video, and I find it really interesting that this conversation has somewhat become about whether or not Frankie should have made this video as opposed to some of the other things that have happened with this whole situation. Because to me, that's just not really what it's about at all. Frankie's opinion is just one person's opinion. This book never would have been pulled from publishing over a single person's opinion. But you might be wondering, what were Frankie's reasons? Why did Frankie think AI was used? Well, as I've already mentioned, the video is 2 hours and 40 minutes long, so I'm gonna give a brief summary. But I do recommend that you just go check out Frankie's video if you want more information. And also, I have not read Shy Girl myself. Some of the things that Frankie listed and gave quite a few examples for were things like heavy repetition of words. For example, the word sharp was used 159 times in a 215-page book. That's crazy pants. And that's just one word. There were a lot of other words that were repeated a lot as well. That was just the most egregious example. And it wasn't just repeated words, but also repeated phrases. Pretty much every noun had an adjective to describe it. A lot of times things were described with 2 adjectives, and the adjectives wouldn't really make sense paired with that noun. Now, one thing that I flagged while watching Frankie talk about that specifically, because my degree's in computer science, and so I understand a little bit more about how generative AI actually works, is not just the fact that you would have a pair of adjectives to describe a noun that didn't really make sense to describe that noun. Generative AI is a statistical model. So essentially what the algorithm is doing is predicting the next most likely word or phrase of words in the sentence. So you know how you can press just recommended word when you're texting and you can create like a crazy sentence on your phone? Generative AI is like that, but much more advanced, and so it actually works to make a relatively human sounding sentence. But that's how you can picture it. And so one of the things that I clocked when Frankie was giving examples of, you know, blah, 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 noun, adjective, and adjective, is that the first adjective actually often did make sense paired with that noun, but it was the second adjective that didn't really make sense being paired with the noun. But you could maybe imagine an object that was described with those 2 adjectives. Like you could see how the adjectives would go together. That to me was like, oh, because then you can kind of see how the sentence was generated, right? You have a noun use and then an adjective, but then maybe the algorithm took that adjective and generated the next 2 words, blank and blank, and that second adjective doesn't really match the noun. You see what I'm saying? That's just me going off of the examples Frankie was giving, though. I would like to remind you that I have not read this book myself. Everything we've said so far is all a marker of generative AI writing, as well as listing things in threes, using similes that on the surface make sense, but actually don't really make any sense once you think about them a little bit deeper, and so on and so forth. Frankie also brought up that there are really, really confusing formatting issues. Now, the book is self-published, so the occasional formatting issue makes sense, but according to Frankie, in the middle of a sentence sometimes it'll just enter into a new paragraph with an indent as though there should be a new paragraph start there, even though you were in the middle of a sentence, and also that the page breaks at the end of pages weren't always consistent. And Frankie brings up that this is confusing combined with the fact that there is not a single spelling mistake in the whole entire book. And it's just hard to imagine how these things could exist at the same time. An author that didn't take the care to go through the entire final formatted copy and ensure that there wasn't a formatting error on seemingly every page after the first 20 or so pages, according to Frankie. So was that careless with the final formatting of it, but somehow didn't have a single spelling mistake in the whole entire book? It's just hard to imagine that those 2 things would exist at the same time. And along that same train of thought, something that Frankie didn't say, but was another thing that I was thinking when watching the video, is it's hard to imagine an author that would both make the mistake of repeating so many words and phrases so many times and also having so many instances of this very overwritten purple prose with these similes that just don't really track and don't make a lot of sense. But I do think that what can sometimes lead to that purple prose, that overly lyrical writing that is trying to be really poetic but just ends up being really confusing and distracting, it just sometimes feels to me like that can be caused by an author trying to avoid repeating words that it would be perfectly acceptable to repeat. For example, if I'm reading a long chapter of characters in a forest and they're interacting with the trees around them actively, I would expect to read the word tree at least once a page throughout that entire chapter. I would not bat an eye at that, and I would not be like, why is this author repeating the word tree so many times? Because there's just only so many words that you can use to refer to trees before you would run out of natural words and would have to start digging into a thesaurus to find more words for tree to avoid just repeating the word tree. And so of course you would try, right? Like you would think of every natural way possible to phrase those sentences so that you don't repeat the word tree as much as possible. But then you would reach a point where you're probably far enough away from your last use that you could just use it again and it's fine. And again, nobody's gonna bat an eye. That's not the only thing that will cause purple prose, but I do think that that actually can be a factor in some of what can lead to purple prose. And so I also have trouble imagining an author that would both write these very I'm 14 and this is deep similes that like the second you start thinking about them a little bit harder, you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And also would repeat so many words and phrases such an insane amount of times. Like, it's just hard for me to imagine an author that would do that. So like I said, I highly recommend that you go and watch Frankie's video because there's a lot of really great information in there. But I will admit that I walked away from it relatively convinced that there was a possibility that generative AI was used given the evidence presented. And a lot of people felt that way, and the video's on 1.3 million views now, right? So a lot of people have seen it. And early in it being posted, Mia Ballard allegedly commented herself under the video. Now, I did not find this comment under the video itself because it's pretty buried at this point, and we don't know for sure that this is actually Mia Ballard's account. However, this statement has stayed consistent from Mia Ballard, so what is said in this comment is still what Mia Ballard is claiming in more official statements that are much more credibly coming from her. I am inclined to believe that this comment was left by her, but just take it with a grain of salt. Hello, Frankie. This is genuinely heartbreaking to write because I've been a fan of your channel for a long time, but I need to clarify a few things. I did not edit or format Shy Girl myself. At the time, I didn't have the money for a professional editor or formatter. Those services are expensive, and I was working on a broken laptop doing the best I could with what I had. Someone in my writing group offered to help and assured me she'd do a thorough job, so I trusted her. In the process, she also changed a lot of the wording and encouraged me to lean more poetic because that's my background, and I listened. I should have done one final, careful pass before publishing, and that's on me. But the formatting and editing issues being pointed out are not present in the traditionally published edition. Most importantly, I did not use AI to write this book. What I can say is that the version you're referencing was edited by someone else, and I only later realized she may have run parts of it through an AI tool during her editing process. When my first book, Sugar, was edited by someone different, I never received these AI allegations. The accusation started after I used the same person for my novella, which I've since pulled, and for early versions of Shy Girl. I'm not able to watch the rest of the video myself, but I needed you to hear this directly. Being a Black woman in the publishing space has been exhausting. I get attacked constantly when all I'm trying to do is write. Mia said that is consistent with what Mia Ballard is still saying now. She is not at this point denying that AI was used. She is saying that it wasn't her. It was a friend who edited the book. She has said she's going to take legal action against this person. She has not, at least as of me making this video. I wanted to wait until we talked about the comment to make my overarching point about the AI allegations here, which is that any individual of these pieces together would not themselves prove AI use in any way, shape, or form, but it's the combination of all of it together that paints a really suspicious picture, at least for me. There are quite a few markers of generative AI writing in the actual manuscript, and then the fact that the author's initial response, even before this was really a question with the publisher, was I didn't use AI, but what maybe the person who edited it did. And especially because she then talked about how that person changed a lot of the wording and she just trusted her. You know, I should have done one more like thorough pass before I published it. I just find that to be far-fetched, honestly. And I think best case scenario here, like even if she is telling the truth, then you're admitting to somebody else changing large swatches of the writing of your book and just publishing that without checking it. What does that say about how you feel about your writing and the craft of it and how much you care about the final product? I'm just having a hard time imagining an author doing that. You know, you send your manuscript to someone to edit and they send it back to you and are like, hey, by the way, I changed like massive parts of it. I feel like my initial response to that would be like, why did you do that? You don't like my writing? But then of course I would go and see what they changed. Like, it just seems strange to me that she just was like, okay, and then hit self-publish, according to her. So that's why I'm saying, like, either way, this is really, really bad for her, because the best case scenario is that this is true and she's not exactly giving her readers the impression that she cares about her writing that much, or it's not true and she was the one who used AI. Which admittedly, I think is the more likely scenario. Now, we don't know for sure, but I just feel like if you didn't use AI and somebody made a 2-hour and 40-minute video accusing you of using AI, that the response would be, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. What are you talking about? Like, the fact that even her initial response before the publisher got involved at all was, oh, wait, it wasn't me, kind of tells me that she maybe already knew that some AI was used, which again implies to me that it was probably her that used it, but we don't know for sure. All of that to say that brings us up to this past week, as of me filming this, where the New York Times posted an article about this. And by the time the article actually got posted, the publisher, Hachette, had pulled the novel from publishing, but they did it because the New York Times reached out to them for comment. And when they did, they gave them some of the evidence that they had for their article. And amongst that evidence was a tweet by a Max Sparrow that says, "It's real. Pangram says this book is largely AI generated." And there's a screenshot of a result that says AI detected 78.3%. This was cited as a source in a New York Times article. But it gets worse, because this Max character is actually a co-founder and CEO of Pangram, which is a new AI detection tool. So I will just point out that he is financially incentivized to claim this tool is super accurate, and they do. Pangram claims that their AI detection tool is over 99% accurate and has a near zero false positive rate. Now, as I've already mentioned in this video, I am your resident BookTube software girly. And the first thing I just want to say is we're blindly trusting the CEOs of tech companies now. When do we start doing that? I'm not saying that they are lying. I'm just saying that if I had 10 tech CEOs in a lineup in front of me and I asked each of them for a fact about their product and how well it works, statistically speaking, I'm getting 10 lies back. You just can't take these bitches' word for it. I'm sorry. AI detection tools at this point in time are notoriously inaccurate. This AI detection tool claims to have solved this issue. I will say, I read their abstract, and they do, at the very least, have a surface level explanation on how they did that that does make sense to me. However, they only tested it on 1,600 documents that weren't in their initial training set. And they compared that to running those same documents through other AI detection tools to show it being more accurate. We don't actually see, there's no in-depth information about what they ran through. They're just giving these numbers, and that's not that many in the grand scheme of these algorithms, right? But not only that, they're saying that they ran that data through it and it was that accurate. Again, I'm not saying they are lying. I'm just saying there is potential. There is the potential that they are just straight up lying about this. So I will say, reading the abstract made me relatively hopeful, because at this point in time, there are no super accurate AI detection tools. And if they are telling the truth, then there is the potential here that this one is, because again, their explanation about how they achieve that accuracy makes sense to me on the surface. But I do not think we have enough evidence at this point in time that that actually did lead to this amount of accuracy for me to just blindly trust that this algorithm is that accurate. Not only that, but if you go into the actual report on this book that gave this 78.3% number that he tweeted about, that the New York Times then cited as a source, that then led to the book being pulled from publishing, he ran a pirated copy of the book through his algorithm. So it was not like an official EPUB or anything like that. Like, he pirated it. How do we know that the version he ran through the tool is the original version? We just don't know. We don't know for sure. It could be. But not only that, I actually went through, because you can see what swatches of the text it says is AI generated and what swatches it says is human written. I was literally just clicking around at random and found 2 different spots back to back where in the middle of a paragraph, in the middle of like a stream of consciousness, it allegedly switches from AI to human written, or from human written to AI written. And again, just clicking around at random, found 2 examples of this. And again, not just in the middle of a paragraph, like in the middle of a thought. Let me read you this. So one of them is, I stand there frozen, my body heavy and trembling, my mind spiraling in tight, endless loops. He's right. Of course, he's right. No one would believe me. I know how they treat women like me. They'll see me for what he's turned me into. I agreed to this. And allegedly, according to this tool, up to, of course, he's right, is likely to be AI generated, but starting at no one would believe me is allegedly human written. Again, I actually do believe, having watched Frankie's video and seeing the author's response, that it's likely that generative AI was used. But I'm also having trouble imagining that this is true, that in the middle of this stream of consciousness, it was like generated up to halfway through this paragraph, and then that she wrote the rest of this and then some underneath it. I'm just having trouble like visualizing that. And then if you scroll down, it happens again. The first bite is clumsy, my teeth sinking into the soft flesh of his neck. Blood spurts out in hot metallic bursts, coating my lips, my tongue, my chin. The taste is intoxicating, the warmth of it filling my mouth. I bite again, harder this time, tearing away a chunk of skin and muscle, and so on and so forth. So apparently this first sentence of this paragraph, the first bite is clumsy, my teeth sinking into the soft flesh of his neck, is part of the human written chunk. And then as soon as blood spurts out and hot metallic bursts starts, that's where it alleges that AI generated the writing. And again, this was just me clicking around at random. Like I was looking for these transition periods. I was looking for, if it's saying that it thinks some of it was AI detected and some of it wasn't, then what is it saying it thinks is AI detected and what is it saying isn't? Again, I feel very mixed about this because I do actually believe, and we don't know for sure, but I do believe that AI was used to write this book, or at least assist with it. I'm not sure that this tool can reliably tell us that. And I just think we shouldn't be blindly taking their word for it. It's a pirated copy of the book. It just seems a little bit iffy to me, I'm gonna be honest. I'll just go back to let's never take a tech startup CEO's word for how well their product works. But this, amongst the other accusations, led to the publisher doing their own internal review and pulling the book from publishing, because when Mia Ballard signed with them to publish, she signed a contract saying that it was all her own original work, and so she is in breach of contract. And so they terminated the contract. And we have seen very mixed reactions to that online. Understandably so. There are a lot of people who are applauding this move, saying, yep, we don't want generative AI in publishing. And there does seem to be a good amount of credible evidence that generative AI was used. And so good on the publisher for pulling it. But there are about an equal number of voices right now saying, whoa, we don't know for sure though. We don't have definitive proof. And was this fair to Mia Ballard? And this is where we start to dive into just what my thoughts are on this overarching situation. I think there's merit to both sides of this conversation. The big thing I will just say is that we don't actually know what was said behind the scenes. We don't know what Mia said to the publisher. And again, she's not even denying at this point that AI was used. She's just saying it wasn't her. She did claim it was all her own original work. And again, either somebody else rewrote large swatches of this book, or she used generative AI, and potentially the person who rewrote those large swatches used generative AI if they did. No matter what, Mia Ballard is somewhat publicly admitting that this was not all her own original work. So if that is why they pulled it, then that does make sense, right? But I don't think that that means that the publisher isn't at fault here. Again, I have not read this book. I'm going off of what Frankie said in their video, but it was 2 hours and 40 minutes long, and they read quite a bit of the book out loud over the course of that video. And I've seen a lot of other people corroborating the same points. It does not seem like this book was very well written. And no matter what, the publisher signed to publish a very poorly written book. And if it was that easy to flag the generative AI use, if it went all the way back to some of those early reviews, then presumably the publisher would have noticed that too. Other people have also pointed out that the publisher is not necessarily against the use of generative AI in writing. They just want it to be disclosed. So it's not even that they wouldn't be willing to publish an AI book. They just want the author to tell them that they used AI and Mia lied, allegedly. So it's not not that I think that the publisher is like a good or innocent actor in all of this, but that doesn't mean that the allegations are incorrect either. And just because I'm also saying that I don't think that we can take this company running it through their tool and saying that the tool has like a near zero false positive rate, like just because I don't think we can take that as fact either, doesn't mean that I don't think the AI allegations are credible. And so I think this is just a really nuanced and weird and interesting situation. Like I said, I can understand both sides of the reaction to it right now. And I honestly think a lot of it, I've thought so hard, like trying to figure out a less pretentious way to say this. And I'm so sorry, I literally can't figure it out. But all of it feels very control seeking to me. That's what made me want to talk about it. Like this is the piece of this story that I find to be so interesting. There are essentially two camps of people right now with this overall conversation, and definitely some people trying to bring nuance into this conversation as well. I'm not trying to say that I'm the only person doing that. I'm just saying that there are these two sort of teams in all of this. There's the side that's super anti-generative AI in publishing, which, I mean, I'm that way as well. I think most of us are. I think there's very few people out there that are chill and cool and down with generative AI writing books and publishing. They're like, most people in the book world are like, no, 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 wrong, bad. We do not want that. But this camp of people that I'm talking about, they view themselves as AI detectors themselves with near zero false positive rates. And to them, if they read a book and they think it sounds like AI, then that must be fact. And those people are in a weird way starting to moralize writing a bad book, which to be fair has always happened. Like there's always been people in the book space who, if they read a book and they don't like it and they feel like it kind of wasted their time, that they think that that is some kind of moral failing on the author's part. It's not actually a moral failing to write a bad book. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing unethical about it. But there is something unethical about using generative AI to write a book. And so if you just accuse any book that you read that you don't like of being AI, then you're moralizing bad writing. You see what I'm saying? Human beings are capable of writing terrible books, of which I have read plenty. You do not need to use generative AI to write poorly. And this might not seem like it's that big a problem if you don't have a book platform. I don't know how often you guys go into comment sections under book videos and read what people are saying, but because I'm a creator, I do that all the time under my own videos. And it feels at this point like anytime I talk about any book whatsoever, even if I didn't have that much negative to say about it, I'm gonna get a comment from somebody saying, oh my God, I read this and it was so bad. Honestly, I think they used AI. And especially if I have negative stuff to say about it, then people will say, this sounds so bad. It honestly sounds like they maybe used AI. Like people are just immediately correlating these things in their mind. But what did I mean when I said it feels a little bit control seeking to me? I think that there are a lot of people who want to believe that they could never get got by generative AI and that they would always be able to tell. And that there could never be an instance of an author using AI to write their book and getting away with it. They want to feel like they have control over that. And so to them, their control is their own mental AI detector. And if they read it and like it, then it's not AI. And if they read it and don't like it, then it must be AI. Or some people who do think about it a little bit deeper than that, but again, do seem to consider themselves to be able to discern whether or not something was written with AI with a near zero false positive rate. And I just don't think any of us can do that. And so you have to caution yourself against believing that you will always be able to flag it, because that's just not true. But on the flip side of the equation, there's a lot of people who are saying that you should never accuse a book of being AI without concrete proof, because how could we ever know for sure? And we don't want to perpetrate AI witch hunts. And I don't think that's fair either. And I also think that's kind of control seeking, because I think what those people are trying to prevent is a situation where one person says that they think AI was used and it causes this mob, but the author didn't actually use AI. And they want to feel like they can prevent that from happening. And the way to prevent that from happening is by never accusing anything of being AI unless a prompt was left in it or the author admitted to it, because those are the only things that would make us definitively sure. And again, I'm not the only person who's trying to bring nuance into this conversation, but that is what I'm about. I am about to do that. I don't say what I'm about to say to be doomsday. I just say it to be real. Both of these situations are going to happen. That is why generative AI is so bad for the book world. That's why this is so terrible. There's no upside. There's no upside here, because there are going to be instances of authors using generative AI and getting away with it and nobody ever knows. And there are also going to be instances of authors being accused and experiencing reputational damage and they did not use AI. Both of these things are going to happen until we actually do have a surefire way of knowing off of the writing alone whether or not generative AI was used. And we do not have that at this point in time. Yes, this company is claiming that that's them, but we do not have enough evidence to believe that at this point in time. At least I don't. And so unfortunately, both of these situations are going to happen, and we just have to bring nuance into every single AI allegation. We have to look at it in isolation. I would caution against believing that you are some kind of AI detection tool. You are not. You could get got. You could be fooled. You could absolutely read something that especially was edited by AI more so than actually generated by it and get fooled. And similarly, some of the mistakes that AI makes come from humans. Like AI is trained off of human writing, and humans are capable of writing bad books. So you have to just decouple in your mind like bad book from AI writing. Just because a book is written poorly doesn't mean AI was used. And if you're correlating those two things, you're immediately in the wrong. And just one marker of generative AI does not mean AI was used. So if you see one of the flags, that does not immediately mean generative AI was for sure used. You gotta look at the overarching picture. You gotta look at the whole situation. But on the flip side of that, I also don't think it's fair to say that people can never point out if they think generative AI was used if they have enough credible reasons to believe that. For example, with Frankie's video, there are so many people now saying that Frankie should not have made this video because it was part of the chain of events that led to this book being pulled from publishing. I do not think that is fair to Frankie at all. Frankie is a single person who read this book, who had tangible reasons why they believed it was written with generative AI, and they shared those reasons and they made a credible point. And that's why the video had so much impact. I don't think it's fair to just say people can't do that because what if they're wrong? I do think it's fair to say you shouldn't just accuse AI because you didn't like the writing. But I don't think we can just say you should never accuse AI because how would we know for sure? Because you can paint enough of a picture that you can be reasonably sure even if we don't have concrete proof. And this is an example of a situation where that happened. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, the only thing that we have control over in this world is ourselves. And so I would just encourage you, viewer of this video, to just bring nuance into these conversations when you're forming your opinion. Do not just immediately think bad writing must be AI. Do not just immediately believe somebody else's AI allegation without digging into it a little bit yourself. And remember that you are not an AI detection tool and that you could be fooled. But also remember that people are entitled to their opinion, and especially if somebody has reasons why they're saying it, then they're valid in sharing their opinion that they think generative AI was used. And above all else, do not let this corporation's role in this fall to the wayside. This is not on Mia Ballard alone. Hachette is also responsible for this. And on some level, the New York Times. Just once again, let's not blindly take a tech startup founders and CEO's word for how accurate their product is. Let's wait for that to be a little bit more proven and also a few more years to make sure that those founders don't go to jail for fraud. And then I think we can believe them. That's gonna be all for me today, you guys. I'm sorry this one was such a bummer, and that there is the even more bummer of this is just the world we're living in now, and this kind of stuff is gonna happen more and more. And I'll just round it out by coming back to my point that we just need to analyze each situation in isolation. Try not to jump on the bandwagon. Try not to jump into the mob. Let's also not just say we have to not accuse anybody at all ever, because people are going to try and use generative AI, and we do not want that, and we want to discourage that. And in this instance, at the very least, I do believe that there is some merit to these allegations, and there is a high likelihood that generative AI was used in writing this book. And I think it's fair for people to call that out about a book if they have reasons why they think that. Gonna be all for me today, you guys. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!